Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 29th day, I think, of July 2024. My channel simply is Discerning What is True. My talk is going to be simply called My Criticism of the book called The Pagan Christ by Tom Harpur. Harpur is spelled Harpur instead of usually ER. Um, so I read the book, completed it yesterday. Um, he has some good points in the book. I'm not saying he doesn't, but I believe he's a little bit naive in some areas. In fact, the last part of the book really actually reveals what I call his shortcomings of what I feel that he thinks that the church itself, and he's an Anglican. Now, Anglican is a way of, some would call that Episcopalian here in America. Others would be the Church of England and then Anglican. Um, now, Anglicans are what I would call a break off, I think, of the Episcopal Church, as well as I recollect. So there's two churches here in Aiken, the largest church that is with the Episcopal Church in Aiken, basically in downtown Aiken, a massive structure, almost as massive as the Catholic Church here. What I mean by is the architecture of the building, more old style architecture, which that's not the issue. The Anglican church is a much smaller church. Probably no more than 100 people are there at the most. But they eventually broke off. I don't know a whole lot about the English Reformation. That is, um, that was not what I pursued. That is, and when I was studying in seminary church history, I was interested in what I would call the patristics, which is the early church history. Also, the areas of the church history that most people don't talk about, which is the Anabaptists, which is something I had an interest in deeply. Also, naturally, the Reformation with John Calvin and Martin Luther. So, my point here simply is he's he's short-sighted. He looks at things as actually that this can change. Well, it's a possibility that might change. Although I think simply is there's too much money and power still involved in these churches. And I'm talking about all churches. I'm not talking about the Catholics. I'm not talking about the Episcopalians. I'm talking about all the churches because simply is as they most of these people are not going to change their perspective. They're not, and he thinks that's going to happen, and that's not going to happen. It's a completely different perspective than what they've taught for over, well, let's just say it's roughly started in the, let's just say 300s. Let's just say 350. How about that? So this has been going on for over 16 to 1700 years. Even though the Reformation supposedly is to do with what we call, basically the word Reformation means simply reform. What does reform mean? Well, reform means simply is it's not starting over. This is where the word really actually shows what happens. The Lutheran Church and the Calvinist Church, John Calvin's church in Geneva, and the church in Luther, and also with Zwingli in Switzerland, are actually reform groups. So what happens simply, they haven't dealt with what I call the foundation. The foundation is still there. They are still part of what I would call the Catholic perspective, meaning that they haven't torn down all the scaffolding of that. Okay, they haven't torn it all. They haven't torn it down. And so what they've done is just reformed it. Let's just change it a little bit and tweak it a little bit and make it work. Well, folks, that's not getting to the truth, is it? That never will get to the truth. So these guys, most people in the Protestant churches, reverend and put these guys on pedestals, which I did at one time. John Calvin, Martin Luther, Zwingli. I was less of Zwingli in some ways. I didn't agree with his perspective. I don't know if you understand the Switzerland history at all. Switzerland is basically a country that was basically what we call confederations. So it was not what I call a unified country at one point. It was actually confederations of different areas of the part of the where it's located at. Meaning that simply is that some people speak French in Switzerland, some people speak German in Switzerland, and some people speak Italian in Switzerland. So this kept basically a barrier in order to keep what I would call unifying the country. Eventually, it has unified. As far as I know, and this is on circumspect, I believe all three of these languages are still spoken in Switzerland. I did meet a gentleman long ago who was from Switzerland who came to America to work here. This is probably when I was roughly a teenager or young 20s, basically. And I learned a little bit from him. His first name was Manfred Leite, was his name, and his wife, and he had a couple of children. And his back, as far as I could tell, he could speak German. And he worked for a company called Sandoz, Sandoz, which is no longer in business. They were bought out by another company. They had a plant actually located in a place called Martin, South Carolina, which is actually about 10 to 15 miles away from Allendale, South Carolina, if you know where that's at. But anyway, I'm kind of digress a little bit, but I wanted to share with you simply back to the whole idea of Tom Harpur thinking that simply this is going to work out in the churches. No, 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 no. This is not going to change. Either as people are going to have to pull out of those churches and start something new, which I don't think that's going to happen either. That would take almost a revolution sort of spirit in most people. Most people are not, they're not there. They're just not there. Spiritually, they're not. The things we talk about, me and Phil, are talking about what we call esoteric Christianity. Most people have given up on Christianity completely, meaning that simply they're not even going to consider esoteric Christianity, or they're not going to look at it with the Pagan Christ. They would just say, well, they're just creating, or they may think of it as being, oh, well, they're just creating a nuance on it, so to speak. They're just trying to add to the train here and adding a caboose, so to speak, to the end of the train itself. As though here we have something else. We have now strawberry ice cream instead of vanilla ice cream, so to speak. So my thinking is simply Harpur is, it's good he wrote this book. He has some great notes at the end of the book, which I shared last night, yesterday. They're good notes because basically that he does point out that the changes took place, and what we call the Dark Ages, or the silent years, so to speak, which roughly were almost 800 or 900 years, and very little writings are there. Either they were quote unquote destroyed because the church itself, the Catholic Church, saw itself as the only church. Period. Nobody else was supposed to be a part of anything. In fact, anybody who taught anything else was eliminated, and I mean eliminated. Period. Which doesn't reveal anything Christ-like about the church at all. And yet people think they can solve that problem. But yet you have blood on your hands here, folks. You have enormous blood on your hands. Even though you may not do that today, it still is there. And it will never change. History will not change in that regard. So the only way this is going to happen is what I would call mystery school somewhat. There's going to be what I call a way of basically, underground, so to speak, of teaching this. It's not going to be popular. Of course, it's not going to be popular. It never was popular. You got to get your dreams out of, you just basically got to get your head out of your ass in some ways, because it's never going to be popular, because people are not really ready for this, because most are immature. Most, as me and Phil have talked about, most people are animal-like, and that's true. Most people are animals. They really are, because they don't use their noggin. They don't use their head. They don't truly actually pursue those things. They don't pursue anything deep in life. They're tickled to death to actually, watch movies on television every night, day, or whatever, week, whatever, to what I would call basically not dealing with reality. So it's a way of actually escape. Most people are involved in what I call escape at this point. And that's provided. That's provided on purpose. Many ways simply is that I'm not saying all these things are bad. No, that's not what I'm saying. But most people delve into that. Many people now, most men nowadays, sometimes come home and after work, so to speak, and they play games on their computer. That's how they quote unquote escape from what what goes on at work or whatever. They're not able to handle it, so to speak. It is a rough place, you know. And I tried to point out to people, this place is hell. It is. It is. Actually, the West, in some ways, is not nowhere near the hell that is involved in the third world. But that's about to change, though. We're seeing all kinds of economic shifts that are taking place also throughout the world right now. And so, what many people are taking for granted, well, might not be here. You see, and this is not by fear. Just you just can see the signs of the times because there are not what I call academia people who are even teaching truth, much less anything else, because it's poo poo at this point, which is, you know, this is even you at one time people were you know, to do what I would call simply want to escape in ways that most people don't even pursue anything to do with philosophy at all. They don't even look at that. I've gone to the library I used to go to actually when I was in college, which is local here. And the point simply is that those books are not even picked. Those books are not even used. They're collecting dust, as one would say. Now, part of that may be to do with to do with everything being put on the internet, so to speak. My fear is simply is those books eventually will no longer be there. You see. So you got a question here. Life is so hard. How can we handle it mentally? Well, I'm not really interested in the mental perspective. I'm looking at it spiritually. So I'm looking at it spiritually because that's who we are. We came from spirit. We came from God. We're all basically have God within us. And that's what me and Phil and Langdon has been talking about roughly almost a year now, talking about these things on as we share the videos to people. It's a lot of this is to do with simply it's the spiritual aspect of who we are. We gravitate towards the flesh in some ways. So we spend all our time in our life today, even long ago. Many people spent time actually working in fields and working their behinds off. It's never changed in that perspective, except that now we live in the industrial age, and that age is now changing from industrial to what I call computer age, whatever you want to call it, an age that's completely different from that. But the problem simply is that it's still mentally hard because most people have been quote unquote trying to think of the word I want to think of. Dealing with what I would call how they've been treated as children. So there's trauma-based information. Trauma, people have gone through so much trauma in their lives that it's a enormous stumbling block or struggle for them to actually to even discover who they are. Okay. It takes someone with enormous abilities to basically have the will to continue on in that and not allow that to hold them down. You know, it's like a ball and chain, so to speak. People with the having the issue with trauma, it's like a ball and chain is holding them back. And sometimes I believe simply is that they allow it to happen. I'm not saying on purpose, but they don't know. So I hope that answers your question. But back to the whole eye here, and I'm not going to go too long with this video. This is going to be a short video because I basically have things to do today. But I wanted to basically just share my thoughts about what this Pagan Christ by Tom Harpur. Yes, most people in Christianity do not know today that their what has happened to them in the past is to do what I call all these things that this has been written down on a piece of paper in a Bible, which the Bible does have the answers. That might knock people away. Well, yes, it is. It does have the answers. The key simply is it has answers in it. But the problem simply is we don't know how to read it rightly. We come in with a literal perspective, and there's where we make our mistake. We don't see it as actually stories, as me and Phil have talked about. We don't see it as a way of actually the metaphysics that do with the number 3, the number 7, the number 12. These numbers that are in the Bible all over the place. We don't see basically the stories of the Jewish writers, and the Jewish writers were brilliant writers here because they're actually revealing truth only for those who actually are pursuing it. It's not for the average Joe out there who is not really actually seeking after it, because he thinks that he goes to church and his pastor is telling him the truth. Or if he goes to any other particular place of worship, he thinks that that's, they're telling him the truth. And the problem is that the system is developed that the pastors, clergy are paid for what they teach, and they go to a seminary and are taught the literal perspective. So nothing's going to change in that regard, you see. That's not, this is what people don't understand. Well, we can make this change. Such. How's it going to change? Are you going to overthrow the seminaries? How's that going to change? How many seminaries are located? Let's just say this, for example. How many seminaries are in the United States? I believe there are probably over 100, if not 200 seminaries in the United States. And you're talking about all kinds of groups. Let's look at the Presbyterians, for example, just to give you an idea. There are actually 5 or 6 different Presbyterian denominations in this country. Okay? You've got the EPC, you got the ARP, you got the UPC, you have the PCA, you have the PCUSA, and you have, I think EPC is the Evangelical. It's one other one. I can't think of it. There's 6 of them. The one at Westminster Seminary. The RPC, the Reformed Presbyterian Church. That's 6 different denominations that have their own seminaries. And there are other ones. There is a group that basically is called the Reformed Presbyterian Church. I'm not Reformed, but it's actually based upon the Presbyterian belief systems. And they have a group called the Reformed Theological Seminary, and they're located not only in, quote unquote, Charlotte, North Carolina. Not only are they located in Mississippi, they're also in Orlando, Florida. And the Westminster Seminary has one in Philadelphia and has one out west in Escondido, California. So you see, now you add that up, you've got 4 more groups in here, so to say. So you've got 10 seminaries based upon a Presbyterian denomination. And you have other seminaries like Gordon Conwell, which is also has a located in Charlotte, and also one in Boston. Okay, that's just the Presbyterians. Okay, and the ARP is probably one of the smallest, if not EPC, and the Reformed Presbyterian Church. There are less than 35 to 40,000 people who go to those particular churches. So you're not talking about big denominations. So when I was at a group where it's called Erskine Theological Seminary, which is part of the ARP Church, which is simply called the Associate Reformed Presbyterians, which is a group of people who broke off from the Church of Scotland, and they're associates and Reformed. There were 2 groups that came here from Scotland, divided, and eventually got together and became the ARP, which is Associate Reformed Presbyterian. When I was at the seminary there were probably no more than maybe 100 students there, and most of those, some of them were actually going there from the United Methodist Church. So you take 40% of those, you're roughly looking at 60%, 60 or 70%, 60 or 70 people. Then what you have to realize simply is that most of those are not actually going to be, quote unquote, there were some women who are going to be church educators, and there were probably going to be about 25 or 30 students may become pastors. Okay, so, and that may not mean that they will have a job after they finish their seminary duties, so to speak. The Baptists have enormous seminaries too, also. They have massive seminaries. Dallas Theological Seminary is one of them, enormous seminary. Covenant Theological Seminary, which is part of the PCA. Forgot that one. But anyway, my point simply is there would have to be a revolutionary in what I would call in the church perspective that this would change, and it won't change. So this has to be what I would call taught as a mystery school perspective. It has to be taught to those who actually want to know more. And so when we think about this, how many people are even involved with what Phil Langdon is sharing? Okay. How many have come to ascension besides Phil Langdon. I don't know of anyone yet. Okay. So, we live in dark times, but like I said, this is hell. This is a hard place, very hard place for everybody. For those who are well off to those who are not. Those who are well off are just as lost as the ones that are poor. You see, because they don't understand the spiritual dimensions of who they are. They've forgotten. But I do like what Tom Harpur did do last when I read from his book. He does explain some things about church history that some of the things I did not know. And so I knew about the idea when they decided to no longer in the 500s, which was a major deal in the 563 or 560 something, as I reported that last night, when they eliminated reincarnation. Before that, basically from 300 to 325, let's just say 325 to 550, let's just say a little over 300 years, they taught reincarnation, which was a pagan belief. They eventually eliminated that at the Council of Constantinople in the Eastern Church. And with that, they also taught earlier, much earlier, that if you didn't get your act together, which eventually this would come square against it, they taught simply as that this is the only life you have. So if you die and you don't actually accept Christ as your Savior, you're going to hell. So that went diametrically against what we call reincarnation. See, reincarnation itself, the doctrine itself, you can look at it two ways. Reincarnation simply can maybe an excuse for most people who just simply say, well, I get to come back here again, no problem, which is fine. God's, mercy and peace and mercy and grace is there. And yes, you can continue here many thousands, 2,000 times, whatever, you eventually will get it because you're going to go through some hard times in life and kind of learn some things because you do take some of those things with you when you pass. You do learn some things. You don't come in here. Let's say, for example, you come here for the first time. And so you're basically what I would call a first grade level or even a kindergarten level on a spiritual dimension. And so it's going to take you a long time to progress. Many, many, many times being here reincarnated. And God's not, he's not here to judge. That's not the key. That's what people don't really understand. And the whole idea eventually is for you to eventually make heaven within yourself. Not make it heaven. Don't make heaven, that is, to do it on the outside world. That'll never happen. Never will. And me and Phil have talked about that. But the idea simply is that what Tom Harpur is echoing or speaking about here, hoping that simply the churches are going to change their ways, I don't see that happening. No way. There's too much garbage, or what I would call people are going to lose their positions, and they're not going to do that. They're not. I hope I was wrong. I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't see that happening. It has to have something that takes place and sprouts up from somewhere else, and that would be something what I would call mystery schools, which were one time taught, once were involved in this, and we don't need any gurus. Gurus are actually just as bad. Gurus are not actually sharing what I call truth. They sprinkle it with some truth, but it's again about their quote unquote money and power, because they're not what I call really serious about their spiritual dimensions of what they're supposed to be doing. They're in it for the money and power and prestige. And so that's what actually causes people to quote unquote, mess up. So anyway, I don't want to go too long today. This is just going to be a short outtake of a video today. Again, because simply as I wanted to share this, because I just wanted to end up with what I call the book, The Pagan Christ, because the book is actually is more dumbed down. What I mean by that simply is that it shares and goes in what I call synopsis of what Alvin Boyd Kuhn's shares, but I don't know if Tom Harpur read all of Alvin Boyd Kuhn's works, because there are many of them, over 50 of them. over 50 books or close to it. And many of them are just little pamphlets, you see. And some of these you cannot even get. Either online you can, some you try to get from interlibrary loan, and some of them you can't get. You would have to buy them from a particular publisher here in Montana that would actually, you know, Kessner Publishing Company, which you pay $30 or so for just a little paperback, you know, book, so to speak, type of thing. So again, like I said, this is just my criticisms of the you know, of what Tom Harpur spells out here, especially the last part, which was chapter 10, I think last night. I don't agree with him in that perspective. And I also think simply is that what he's revealed in his book, Pagan Christ, is a beginning. Unfortunately, I don't think Tom Harpur wrote any more books. Okay. He passed away shortly. I want to say 2014, but don't hold me to that. But this book was written in 2004. So this is 20 years ago. Okay. And, you know, my suggestion is simply if someone wants to begin here, yes, you can try here. Yes, read this book. Yes, start at the beginning. But I will always say, this is as Phil me talked about, you need to be reading stuff like, well, you need to read Alvin Boyd Kuhn. And you need to read Gerald Massey's works. And then you need to start reading the Bible and begin to see someplace where what we call the four elements are involved. And you also need to read the things someplace that the Egyptians wrote, and which are, that's another minefield, so to speak. Maybe we'll talk about that. I'll ask Phil next time we meet, maybe this Thursday, what books would he recommend? He's already shared somewhat. One is a guy named De Blutz, a guy from France, who wrote many books about the temples in Egypt. Now, he looked at what I call the dimensions of the temples, the temple of man and the temple of God, he called it. There was two books that he wrote about those. You can get these actually online and read them. They're big time books. Then he wrote two books, basically large books, that actually take pictures of the dimensions of all the temple that is actually located. I can't think of the place right now, but it's in Egypt that he went to. Him and his wife went there. His first name was Renee. I forgot his wife's name, but they were there for 15 years. So they didn't show up for 6 months in there and then leave, which is what most of these guys do that go there to Egypt today, or actually 50 years ago. Okay, and so they don't do what I call critical research. They are probably more than anything else dependent upon others who are there also, which is scary. So they didn't do their own research themselves. They may have gotten a piggy bank, so to speak, off of somebody else. Okay. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for listening. My hopes are that someplace me and Phil are going to meet this Thursday at the same time, which will be roughly, my time will be 9 o'clock a.m. His time will be 2 p.m. in England time, English time, whatever you want to call that. 5 hours ahead of me. I'm located in the East Coast of the United States, and he's located 5 hours away from me. But there's, many people can actually watch these videos. They don't have to watch them live. If they can, great. Make your comments. The comments are there. But I try not to go always into comments because I don't want to always digress. But anyway, thank you for being here again, like I said, and wish you a good day and take care. And always have eyes to see and ears to hear the truth of God. Thank you.